participant come in so I can formally welcome. Good morning, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dipesh Shah. I've had the opportunity to meet virtually all of us on the screen, but there are a few that I will be finishing my round of introductory meetings with. Given the holiday season, it's not been possible to get everyone done before this meeting, but I'm looking forward to it because there have been very, very informative meetings, and I've greatly enjoyed learning from each of you and getting my feet under the table. I'm honored and privileged to take the chair of the new partnership board, following on the good works of the shadow board. We have Richard Hutchins, who's joined us as the managing director. Richard has also been doing extensive stakeholder engagement since joining us. So welcome, Richard. And I say welcome also to Len and Barbara, both of whom have joined us as non-executive.
Thank you. Hello.
Yeah, who we got? Yeah, so look, firstly, I want to say thank you for the extensive work that each of you and the leadership that you've shown in getting us to this point on the shadow board and earlier. I also want to extend my thanks to Barry Wood and Yvonne for the sterling leadership that provided for the shadow board, again, in getting us to this point. I think we build on solid foundations, and we're standing on the shoulders of all of you who've done tremendous work in getting us to this point. The agenda is quite tight. We have two substantive items for approval and a number of papers for noting. They build on the work program that you will all be familiar with because it was designed by the shadow board. We're looking to accelerate on the delivery of a number of chosen themes, and that's what you will see from the paperwork itself. And beyond here, of course, building on a strategy and taking this further, faster forward. There are two papers specifically for decision, which are on the Observatory and on the program for the environment, and we'll spend a bit of our time on those. But having said all of that, in the interest of time, can I suggest that we move on? My belief is that there are no declarations of interest. Richard, can you confirm that that is the case?
I think we should just ask board members, and Councillor Marland's now joined us as well, Dipesh.
Yep, marvellous. Firstly, can I just check, are there any absences? Richard, if you could just check the screen, is there anyone still missing?
I think Councillor Susan Brown is yet to join, but other than that, I think we have a full house of board members.
All right. Let's apologize for absence from Susan unless she joins us. Declarations of interest. Can I just ask if there are any declarations of interest, given the agenda items that we have? I hear none, so please record that there are no declarations of interest.
Dipesh, there are two hands up from Bridget Smith and Lynette Riles.
Marvellous. I think what we might do is can you use your hands as, yeah, actually I've now got them on the screen. Marvellous, my apologies. Bridget, can we start with you?
Thank you, yes. So just very briefly, I lead on the environment for the Cambridge and Peterborough combined. I lead on the environment for the Cambridge and Peterborough Combined Authority as well as for this organisation.
Thank you for that clarification, Bridget. You're absolutely right. We should make sure that that's in there. Lynette?
And just thank you. Just to note, I am a non-executive director of East West Rail.
Indeed. Thank you for those two declarations of interest, duly noted. If there's nothing on the declarations of interest, can I move us on to the minutes of the previous shadow board meeting of June? Are there any comments or concerns? They were published on the website. Are there any areas there of concern to members? If not, can we please have those minutes of the previous shadow board approved? Obviously, not all of us were there, but for those who were duly approved. There are two or three action points, which I think will become clear as we go through the agenda in any event. The one, Bridget, that you and Richard have had a conversation on was whether we invite an LNP representative onto the board. I think that is being now wrapped up in the third NED that we are actively seeking, which is, so rather than a specific representative, which is not in our constitution, but looking to actually bring the environment NED to a close, and there may be a correlation across the two. But I think that's the one action which isn't clear from the paperwork, but I just wanted to update the membership of that. Okay, moving on to the government update. Peter and Chris have both, I'm going to invite Peter to introduce this. It's important also in terms of the work program that we will look at later in our agenda item 10. Pete, I think, yeah, it is Pete, isn't it? Pete, I think where you are, we're getting a lot of echo. I don't know if colleagues are also suffering the same fate. I don't know, could you try again to unmute yourself so you can see whether...
Hello, Divesh. Oh, sorry if this is causing difficulties. I'm also having difficulties with my video as well. Does the audio sound okay now, Divesh?
There's still a bit of background noise. And there's quite an echo. If we continue to struggle, will Chris be able to?
Yeah, shall I kick off? And if it's difficult, I'll pass over to Chris.
Yeah, just before you do, what's important is that we have a work program and agenda, and that will unlock also the second part of this year's funding. So it's important that you bring us up to date, Pete, and also we relate it to the agenda item 10 later in the piece. Can I hand over to you, please, Pete?
Absolutely, Divesh, and apologies again for the technological issues. Yeah, so I'll let Chris speak a little bit about sort of work programme from the government point of view in a second, but just to introduce ourselves, Chris and I both work for the Cities and Local Growth Unit, which is a joint unit between the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities on the one side and the Department for Business and Trade on the other. And essentially, we're interested in all things to do with local growth and decentralisation, of which pan-regional partnerships are a key part. There are 6 area teams across England, and I head up the one that covers the Oxford to Cambridge region, and Chris leads within my team on OxCam and the PRP. So I'll let him introduce himself in a minute. But just to give, I think it's probably just 3 very brief policy updates I'll make. I know you've got a packed agenda, so I am going to keep this brief before I hand over to Chris. I think the first one I'd flag, and all of this is by way of context really, is around East West Rail as the key sort of regional infrastructure project within OxCam. Earlier this year, government reaffirmed its commitment to the scheme, and in May, the Department for Transport published a route update announcement on the Bedford to Cambridge section of the line, which basically confirmed the preferred route through Bedford and with stops at Tempsford and Cambourne and a southern approach to Cambridge. The East West Rail Company are now will be conducting a statutory consultation on this next year, but it's worth the board noting that the spring budget, the government also committed £15 million of capacity funding to support local authorities along the route to maximise economic opportunities. So that's just one piece of context. I think the other thing I'd flag is really around sort of local economic strategies and local economic partnerships. So local enterprise partnerships have been the key body for delivering government's economic growth priorities for most of the last decade. And following an information gathering exercise early this year, government recently confirmed in August that it will be ceasing its core funding of LEPs from April 2024 and looking to transfer those functions around economic strategy, business voice and business support into local authorities. This will obviously have direct impacts for some members of this partnership, and I know a number of you are well aware and indeed actively involved in this. But I think it's worth, for those of you who are newer to the partnership, just being aware that there will be these structural changes a lot across the local growth architecture in the areas that sort of sit beneath the partnership at a local level, as it were. And then thirdly, again briefly, just by way of context, is around Cambridge. You may have seen that the Levelling Up Secretary announced in July his ambitions to for government to do more to realise the potential of Cambridge City under the banner of Cambridge 2040, given its economic importance to UK PLC. In his statement, he set out how he wants the department to work with local partners to unlock existing plans and explore scope to drive future growth through the creation of a new quarter within the city. The department's in the process currently of establishing what it's calling a Cambridge Delivery Group, which will be headed by Peter Freeman as the chair of Homes England, which will be looking to work with local partners on these ambitions and focusing on unblocking constraints to growth in the city, not least water scarcity, which I know is something that's of interest to the partnership more widely as well. I know a number of you on this call with links to Cambridge are actively involved in this work, and while it's really a locally specific initiative, I think it's an important piece of context for the board, given it's quite a high-profile initiative from government's point of view. So those are just the three very brief things I would flag by way of policy context. What I'll do now is hand over to Chris to say a little bit more about sort of operational working with the partnership moving forward. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Hope I don't have that much feedback, but nice to meet you all. I'm Chris Haley. As quite a few of you will know, I work in Pete's team, and I'm kind of probably the key contact for the PLP within the Cities and Local Growth Unit in DLUC and DBT. So just to kind of quickly update, so as you will be aware, in the Secretary of State's letter to the PLP, he offered potentially up to 2.5 mil over this and the next financial year, kind of subject to annual business cases. This is split into some tranches of funding. So the first tranche of 500k was released to the PLP in August to support the projects that are already in train and the development of future priorities. And we also will hopefully be able to make a second 500k payment later this financial year, which is subject to the partnership agreeing its forward work programme, which you'll see is currently in this agenda today, and then also a mid-year review, which will be held between myself, Pete, Rick and Richard, and Michael Furness in his capacity as Section 151 officer at JLDC, which is the accountable body. So the mid-year and annual review process is kind of something that we do across all the PRPs as a kind of standard approach, and it's basically just part of our assurance processes. And then talking about assurance, the kind of second general update is we are developing a PRP assurance framework just to kind of provide clearer expectations around the use of DLUC funding within PRPs. We're working really closely with Richard and the team on that, and hopefully be able to share a draft of that in the coming months. But overall, also a big thank you to Richard and the exec team for kind of all the work they're doing on the they did in the run up to getting that payment released, and in as we head into the annual review, mid-year review even, which we're hoping to have in November.
Thank you, Pete and Chris. Can I open it up to board members and colleagues on the call? Any questions? None? That's succinct and very, very clear, gentlemen. Thank you for that.
Alistair Fitt has a question, Deepesh.
Alistair, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering, Pete Northover, if you could give us some kind of political guidance about why politically the government might kind of be enthusiastic about the Oxcam PRP and then do something completely separate with a splurge in one of the bits of it in Cambridge. It's just a bit hard to understand from a kind of strategic or political point of view why you'd kind of say you were going to invest in the whole thing and then do extra investment in one bit. Can you give us any guidance about that?
Yeah, Alistair, I mean, I suppose ministers would probably say that they don't view those two things as sort of mutually exclusive or contradictory. I think from the Secretary of State Gove's point of view, the focus on Cambridge is around the sort of exceptional circumstances there, and indeed the sort of the significant constraints that are holding back growth, not least water, which has been something that I know local leaders on the call have been writing to the department about. So I think we would just view them as sort of two separate approaches. I mean, and in terms of the Pan-Regional Partnership itself, that was in line with the sort of position set out in the Levelling Up White Paper around the sort of mechanisms that the department would support for sort of local partnership working.
Okay, thanks. That's helpful.
Nick, welcome.
Hello, hi. Sorry, at this point, is this? I'm just trying to understand. Are we discussing prioritisation of the work programme, or is that?
We're just getting it. Nick, at this stage, we're on our agenda item 4, which is the government update.
Right. Okay. Fine. It's just I was.
And we will come to the work programme later in the agenda.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. Let's see. Thank you.
Okay. There was one other hand up earlier. Has that gone down? Anyone else?
Councillor Susan Brown's joined us as well now, Deepesh.
Susan, welcome. We're on agenda item 4, just wrapping that up.
Apologies for being late.
Not at all, not at all. Marvellous, good. Barbara and Susan.
Sorry, I had a hand up. I had a similar question actually about the Cambridge Partnership. So that was covered. So thank you for that. And maybe I've got a little additional question regarding the local partnership, you know, the LEPs. Is there any clarity in terms of how those functions are being integrated now in the new structure? Is there any specific guidance on that?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in on that one. Yeah, so there was guidance produced around the announcement that I think was made in the first week in August around that, which essentially set out that the minister's preference was for the functions that currently sit within local enterprise partnerships to transfer into local authorities, and there are various stipulations set out in that guidance which we can share off the back of this call if helpful around sort of scale and the sort of approach to doing that. And I know there's been lots of discussions locally about how that will happen. Obviously in Cambridge and Peterborough that has already happened through the business board in the Mayoral Combined Authority. So this issue is really for the other parts of the Oxcam region to the west of Cambridgeshire.
Yeah, so sorry if I could just say plans are being developed kind of across LEPs at the moment. And I think, Pete, the plan has to be hatched, even if not fully implemented by April, doesn't it? I think that's the deadline. So LEP boards across the country will be considering what their next move is now.
Thank you, Susan.
Yeah, I'm going to just following on really from what Alistair was saying. I mean, just to say that in Oxfordshire, we have declaring an interest as a director of the LEP. We're looking to see how we can continue to have the good working relationships with district councils that the LEP has allowed us to have, and thinking that maybe our future Oxfordshire partnership, the successor body of our growth board, might be a good way of trying to ensure that we continue that close working relationship, because obviously economic development actually sits with district councils, not with the upper tier authorities. So it's trying to get the balance of those things right, and we're continuing to do some work on that.
Okay. Any other questions of Pete and Chris? Thank you for that update. Dereliction of duty on my part. I should have forewarned everyone that we are recording this in the interest of transparency, and that will be published on our website. Should have covered that earlier, but rectify that now. I think we can move on then to the Data Observatory business case. This also stems, I think, from some of the work done at the Shadow Board, and it's come along in terms of a very clear proposal to the board for approval. Peter, I wonder if you could introduce it and then ask Arthur perhaps to add a few words.
Yes, certainly, Deepesh. So I'm introducing this as chair of the Innovation and Economy subgroup, but that's really kind of a convenience that it sits there, because the work of the Data Observatory, if approved by the Partnership Board, will be for the benefit of the partnership as a whole, and in particular both of the kind of key objectives that we have in relation to environmental sustainability and inclusive economic growth. I suppose for the partnership as a whole, the case for Oxford Cambridge is one of the key things that we need to develop and deliver. Part of that is the branding work, which will be touched on in the communications later on, the story, as it were. But the evidence, the underpinning of that story comes from data, and that's what the proposal to support the Data Observatory. We've already put some startup money into developing this business case as the shadow board, but this is to establish it and then to provide some ongoing funding. And just to briefly kind of cover the rationale for it, and Arthur will add to that. It's really to kind of bind the area together by that shared information, to identify linkages and opportunities in relation to cross-border working. Very important agenda around cost effectiveness, and the business case sets that out in some detail. In other words, that by doing things collectively, we can reduce duplication, and that can be beneficial for the public sector, but also that there could be a significant private sector multiplier effect, which just makes things easier for businesses who are looking for opportunities to work across the area to access data in a cost-effective way, because what it will be doing is doing that neutrally through public funding, therefore saving private sector costs. And the last point to make is that the other well-established pan-regional partnerships, such as the Northern Powerhouse, Midlands Engine, and so on, they already have. And there's a model that we can draw on. It therefore makes what we're going to do cost effective. But I'll ask Arthur just to add a little bit more detail in relation to the objectives and the justification, and then come back to all of you for any questions before asking for approval for the funding, which is 50,000 on a one-off basis, 175,000 on an ongoing basis, the funds for which are already allocated in budgets that the Shadow Board has seen previously. I'll hand to Arthur.
Yes, thank you very much, Peter. That was an excellent introduction. So this will be a very short presentation, as most of the detail will be both in the board paper as a very good summary of the business case, and you can also refer to the full business case in the board pack for more details on this proposal. But this is just an opportunity to give you a very high-level introduction to what the Data Observatory is, why we're doing it, and then open up for questions from yourselves. So the aim of this item really is to present the Data Observatory business case ready for approval, at which point we can then begin implementing the delivery of the project as set out in section 7.3 of the full business case. So to summarize what a Data Observatory is, this is a very simple way of describing what it is. It will be a data hub for disseminating and gathering high quality, up-to-date economic and environmental data, underpinned importantly by analyst support. So we realize that data is only as useful as the insights and understanding that can be derived from it. Hence why analyst resource will be a critical component of making the Data Observatory function and deliver its outcomes. And we're really doing this so we can enable our partners to make more informed decisions when talking about the Oxford to Cambridge partnership, supporting business case development in terms of levelling up opportunities where perhaps there isn't quite as much resource in some parts of the area, and also trying to conduct research while saving time and money, reducing duplication, as Peter said. So three key reasons why we're doing this. We really want to support some of our partners' challenges. So we've identified that there's often sometimes a misunderstanding about the OxCam region, understanding why we're doing what we're doing, and this will really help improve clarity about the region. It will also play an important role in supporting delivery of our existing and future projects. So, for example, the Investment Atlas, while that has resource to continue for 2 years, that project will need a long-term home, and it will also need to be supported by broader evidence about the region to really unlock the true value of that proposal. And thirdly is that this isn't necessarily something that is particularly unique. Other pan-regional partnerships do leverage this approach, both in the UK and internationally. So, for example, the Silicon Valley Institute for Regional Studies is something very similar to what we'd like to replicate for the OxCam region. And indeed, there are also some examples of where this has been done in the region in the past and currently, such as the Cambridgeshire Insight project. But I think what we'd really want to do is make sure that this is a very high quality service, but also does something unique that other pan-regional partnerships aren't doing by including that focus on environmental data and research alongside economic data. So to briefly go through what this is and what this isn't, I think it's important to understand that this isn't going to necessarily be a panacea to all ills on its first day. This is something that will evolve over time, and we'll very much value the steer from the board in terms of how we develop it. But we really want this to be something that is a live evidence base for economic and environmental data, that means to monitor and evaluate the success of the region over time, as a source of analyst advice and support to support our partners, particularly around areas like monitoring and evaluation, something that can help researchers save time. But we definitely don't want it to be something that is a first come, first served service. We don't want this to be a subscription service. This isn't going to be a substitute for our partners' internal policy and analysis functions, but will add value to it by adding resource and capability. And we don't want this to be a data mining exercise where we're trying to artificially justify the Oxcam region. It will be something that's unbiased and very trusted and reliable. So in terms of the timeline, so the development of this business case really started once we had the confirmed budget from government to do something like this. But we really wanted to make sure that we were very clear about what we wanted to develop before we started spending any money. So we've been developing that business case throughout 2023. Assuming that we have board approval for this project, we will then begin delivering the project immediately in line with the project delivery plan set out in the business case, namely having more formal hosting discussions with our universities to involve them more closely in the project in terms of developing the specification and procurement in more detail, recruiting those analysts to add that capacity of understanding the data, and then starting to develop a data portal and have an initial launch, hopefully by the end of the current financial year or very early in the next financial year. We realised that a lot of our partners are quite frustrated that the Pan-Regional Partnership hasn't been delivering very clear deliverable outputs in the short term. We very much want to make sure that we can deliver this and start showing some benefits of the partnership as soon as possible. And the plan that we've set out in the business case shows how we can deliver that. So thank you very much for your time, and I'll be very happy to answer any questions.
Let's open it up for questions. Barbara.
First of all, thank you so much for the presentation. I think it's a fantastic initiative, really needed. My first question is, it's such a big endeavor. How are you going to prioritize the data that you want to start gathering, in terms of, the most impactful one for the partners involved? And how you're going to gather that? Are you going to work in partnership across the university network, but also with the private sector? How is that going to work essentially? And also, sorry to add another question, I would be very interested to see data about how our region is actually proactively already working with the rest of the UK, how we are adding value in that. That evidence, I think, would be really valuable to all of us. But so these are my main questions. I could have some more, but it's a fantastic initiative. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Barbara. So we have been undergoing a very significant stakeholder engagement exercise through developing the original business case, through which we have asked our partners for what particular types of data that they would be after. At the moment, we've had quite high-level responses, but those responses that we have had are summarised, I believe, in Appendix 1 in the business case. So you'll have a list of some of the data that our partners have said that they would require. Most of this is in the public environment, but once we develop the specification in a bit more detail and we get a bit more steer from the working groups, we can make more informed decisions about what data we'd actually like to pay for example, economic forecasts. Secondly, as well, I'd like to mention that the Environment Agency's local natural capital plan data will transfer into the Data Observatory to be hosted there, as the Environment Agency cannot host this data online long term. So we'd be very much making sure that what's already been done is preserved and promoted as much as possible, rather than letting that data fall away. So I'd say that's part of how we've done the prioritization process so far. And absolutely, I think it'd be really valuable to demonstrate the competitiveness of the Oxcam region in a more evidence-based way, not just with the UK, I think, but also globally as well. because I think that we really need to demonstrate just how strong this region is, rather than trying to internally compete within the UK. But thank you very much. That's been very helpful.
Very good. Thank you, Arthur. Bridget?
Thank you. So I'm interested to know what the sort of time frame is around the branding of this, because I think it's really important that we get that sorted out sooner rather than later, and we've got to make sure that the messages we're sending out very early on land in a positive way with people who are living within the partnership area. So where things have gone wrong in the past is that there was a sense that stuff was being done to people. They didn't have buy-in. Most importantly, they couldn't see what was in it for them. So we've got to make sure that there's a really strong message coming across about environmental enhancements and about lifestyle quality of life improvements being part of this, because very often people see any attempt to stimulate growth as being something that will just damage their quality of life. So that's a big piece of work. So just about the time frame to deliver on that.
So Bridget, actually, can I ask Richard to take that?
Thank you, Deepesh. Yeah, I mean, there's a brief update later on in the agenda, but the branding and identity of the region is subject to a separate exercise, which we just initiated, and the first step in that is to, through our advisors and consultants, thinking place is to interview all board members around the branding and identity of the region. Once that work comes through the board and is developing into propositions, that will clearly need to be approved by the board. And at that point, the identity, if you like, of the data observatory can be can be landed more firmly. So I think this is, to be fair, this is a working title for the data observatory that will all cascade from the branding and identity work of the entire region, which we are literally just commencing.
But we will have, Richard, am I right in thinking actually that we will be, the consultation work that's taking place with board members and other stakeholders will be much better advice by the time we have our next board meeting on the branding issue?
Yeah, we'll have got the scoping of that work complete, ready to bring back to the November board.
And to Bridget's point about the messages landing in the right way, it's so important, and absolutely, I think the team are very, very cognizant of that. So thank you for that. Nick.
Thank you. I think this sort of follows on from Bridget's point. I'm just looking at the business case on page 16. It's interesting, I mean, how it's presented in the report. There's a move from red, which is the labour market, to green, which is literature review. And I'm obviously pleasantly surprised, to see that health is mentioned there and about environment. And I guess different members of the board will be interested in, so what has been put forward as kind of the data to be put into this resource. Obviously, I'll say it now, I think health is a priority. But maybe this will come out through the consultation of speaking to different board members, but to make this really land, I've got this feeling about when we're looking at these figures, the minute you start showing them and we get the information out, it's going to start showing the differences. And I would argue inequalities in health, inequalities in environment, inequalities in job opportunities, inequalities in terms of education opportunities. It's very much a sort of a message I know I'm keen to roll out at this end of the Oxcam partnership, and I'm just keen to understand how we will, once we get the information and we quite clearly will demonstrate inequalities, is that not the point where we as an organisation saying this is what we're there to challenge?
Absolutely. So I think that we need to understand these issues first before we start producing strategies and policies and work programs in order to respond to them. And I certainly think that all parts of the Oxcam region should share in the success of the work that the partnership does. I think coming back to your point on health is that internally I've been doing some research around health and looking at some of the areas where indicators of health commonly underperform national averages across the Oxcam region. And as you'd expect, some of the common areas where there's some underperformances distance towards GP surgeries, distance to pharmacies, distance to sports and recreation. So I think it's really valuable that data can be used to understand those areas where commonly across the Oxcam region we have issues, and then we can, in partnership, respond to those issues and prioritise in that way. So I think it's a very important thing to indicate, and I think it's something that where once we understand those issues, we can better design and better allocate the resources we have to respond to them, if that makes sense.
Well, it does. It just, and as I say, it's not for me to kind of, I'm just making the point is that once we, I think we know what we're going to see in all our different areas. There's going to be, because we kind of already know about our different areas, it's then the idea how we work together across a partnership to challenge, you know, where is good environment, where is bad health, you know, and I just as I sit and listen, I just think in knowing how important data is king here, but it's what we do with it and our desire as a board to move forward. So I'm sorry, I don't know if I'm promoting a discussion there rather than a kind of thing. I'm just glad you've at least got health in there. That's my big bugbear. But I think it's no good pointing out the inequalities. It's kind of, are we then going to make a change as a group, as a board?
I think the strategy work that follows on from some of the preliminary work. I mean, I've seen some statistics from Arthur, which frankly, Nick, have surprised me on these issues of deprivation, inequality, health inequality, so on and so forth. So the strategy work that Richard will talk to later will begin to actually ruminate around that data and begin to draw out what is the additionality and what is it that we can do as a partnership across the region to facilitate progress across here. So I think you're absolutely right to draw attention to it's an important theme and that we're taking that on board. Okay, Peter, did you want to add any final comment before we wrap this one up?
No, just thank colleagues for their suggestions, and we'll ensure that feedback is taken on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is the board content to approve the data observatory proposal that Peter and Arthur have shared with us? Perfect. Thank you very much. Duly approved. We then move on to the next agenda item, which is on the environment subgroup project pipeline, which is the second substantive paper for decision. It covers two areas which the board will be asked to approve. One is the governance of the work stream, and the second is the recommendation to approve a series of projects. Can I ask Councillor Bridget Smith to, as chair of that subgroup, to lead us on this and then hand over to a member of the team, who I think will be Nathan, to help you along the way.
That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed, Dipesh. So just a little bit of background for people about, you know, why environment is included in, you know, what might otherwise just be an economic development project. So, you know, this originates when I first joined what was the ARC at the time, and the environment was missing, and the whole project was really stimulating, you know, a lot of unhappiness for people living in what was the ARC area at the time. So, you know, after quite a lot of sort of lobbying, and particularly with the minister at the time, who was Kit Malthouse, I managed to get them to agree that, you know, this was an opportunity here to incorporate significant environmental enhancements in the widest sense into it. So I'm getting lots of beeping noises, and I don't think they're originating from me. I hope they're not too disturbing to people. Okay, I'll continue. So you know, the purpose of including the environment was that, you know, we're living in a world where, you know, the green economy is very much the economy of the future, and we've got to be focusing on sustainable economic growth that incorporates everything to do with moving us to a zero carbon economy and a zero carbon way of life. So, you know, they introduced the environment work stream really to sort of oversee what was going on in the other work streams at the time, but also to run its own work program together. So I'm more than pleased that, you know, that this work stream alongside the environment economy work stream have survived into this new partnership. Peter Horrocks and I have had lots of conversations, and our vision is that at some point these two work streams merge together into one. But as things stand at the moment, the desire of ministers is that they stay as two work streams, and very, very supportive of that. So when we talk about the environmental work stream, it's absolutely not just about green and blue stuff and and trees and waterways and so on, so that is a really important part of it. But it incorporates zero carbon living, renewable energy, the crisis we have with utilities, water and power, decarbonizing transport, and so on. So I think we are all really proud of the work that was done to produce what were called the ARC environment principles. And we'd like one of the ongoing projects to be to move that on to include some things that weren't in it, such as circular economy, but also to make it appropriate to what the minister's vision is as part of this partnership. So I'm very pleased that it's been resourced. Now, we've managed to keep going a working group of about 100 people, and Liz Watts must take huge credit for this. We set up this working group a couple of years prior to the pandemic, and it kept going, and all these people kept turning up on Zoom calls the whole way through the pandemic. And I think that was, well, partly because they were outstanding, committed people, but they shared our vision of there being serious opportunities to do really significant stuff at scale in this regional model, which actually would be nationally significant and had potential to be internationally significant. So if we can create, a green economy in this area that is outstanding, and people worldwide look at us to see how to do it properly, that's always been kind of where I've been going with this, and I'm very glad to think the ministers share that sort of vision. So obviously, keeping 100 people going is quite a task. But what we've done is we refined that down into a sort of smaller core group, which you're being asked to sign off today. But the wider working group, who include government departments, lots and lots of charities, RSPB have been massively significant in this, farmers' unions, local authorities, local nature partnerships, and so on. So we really want to keep them all going, because they're a very, very valuable and committed expert panel, and they will be key in the delivery of some of these projects that I hope you will approve today. So it's very important that we tell them that they're valued partners, and we want to keep on working with them. But just from the sort of logistical governance point of view, we need to refine that down. So I think the work that our officers and Nathan have been doing has found a very comfortable solution on that. So back in May, an awful lot of these 100 people came to South Cambridgeshire, and we ran a sort of working group day where we looked at potential for projects that could be taken forward, which weren't just confined to a small region, which were projects that needed that cooperation and collaboration across district and county boundaries in order to deliver real value. So, it's not about what councils could do by themselves, it's about the added value, the stuff that can only be delivered by partnerships like this. And water's one very good example of, it's very much my problem, but I sure as heck can't solve it. But a partnership hopefully can. So that came up with a couple of dozen projects, all of which, if I'd won the Euro lottery, I would have been delighted to fund myself. Very exciting. But we're very aware that government is looking for early delivery, early results, quick wins. So I'm going to ask Nathan to come in and just talk about how this has been refined down to take 10 projects. That doesn't discount the rest of them. Those will stay and hopefully will be brought forward at the right time. But how we can start demonstrating to government that we are absolutely focused on delivery, and give us the money to do something, give us the powers and the tools to well with all these partners, and then hopefully we'll have some things to celebrate, and we'll be able to invite ministers to come and cut some ribbons at some really innovative projects. So, Chair, if I may, Nathan we'll talk more about how we selected these projects in a bit of detail, and he's very much the expert on this. So thank you.
Thank you, Bridget. Nathan?
Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm the Environment Programme Lead at the Partnership. I've been with the Partnership since March, and as Bridget said, there's a huge amount of opportunity going forward for the Partnership to be able to take forward, and as the challenge, because there are so many opportunities in the environmental kind of spectrum is so wide, that there does need to be a way of kind of configuring and plotting out a way forward. So the projects that have been kind of considered in terms of a full list have been developed and I suppose curated through a number of one-to-one and group conversations that have taken place since March. And really we get to a point of, well, how do we decide which ones that we can take forward and bring to board as a work programme that it requested back in its May meeting with the transition group. So really the start of last week, on the 4th of September, we convened the kind of oversight and coordination group of the environmental programme that really gives effect to the terms of reference that had already been signed off and approved by board in terms of membership, to focus on the projects and to agree a programme that we can then move forward with. I'd put together a prioritisation matrix that tries to create a kind of more of an objective view of projects going forward, a bit of a scoring mechanism, to be honest, that's really based on opportunities around collaboration, amplification of best practice, additionality, importantly, because there's so much good work that's happening across the region. It's not for the partnership to do that as well. It needs to kind of collaborate, support, advocate where it needs to, but also taking into account factors such as cost and time, given the current funding settlement to March 25. So the projects that are in 3.8 is really the distillation of the top 10 or so projects of the 20 that I suppose fared more favourably when we think about collaboration, additionality, need, time and cost. And that was the broad programme that the group adopted and puts before you today. What's worth noting is that the majority of those projects really lend to the opportunities and strengths of the partnership in terms of its convening and facilitative kind of collaborative kind of position across the region. But equally, there are a few kind of smaller projects that can be funded within the budget that's been presented within the papers this morning, that we're looking to take forward, where we can provide that additionality. That's particularly around kind of some elements around investment in green infrastructure, doing some work around how we can best work with the Arc Universities group to leverage funding for how we can use satellite technology to monitor habitats, plus a few other bits and pieces along the way. So that's kind of where we've got to at this point. If you ever wanted more information on the prioritisation, that's kind of on the website and reflective of the meeting that met last week. But I'll stop there and we can take any questions.
Marvellous. Thank you very much indeed. Can I open it up for questions, please? Yeah, Liz.
Thank you. Not so well. It's a little bit of a question, but actually, just to say thank you very much indeed for this paper. I'm very excited about this. I think it takes us all in the direction that I think people. Certainly, I'm speaking as the leader of Oxfordshire County Council, as opposed to my role on this board, which is from EEH, because there's been quite a lot of concern at the Oxfordshire end of the arc that there's too much emphasis, or there has been in the past, too much emphasis on growth and not enough on the environment. And I think this will reassure people that our focus is being put on the right things as far as they're concerned. I'm going to be really nitpicky though, because in the paper in 2.5, you've got the members of the Western Growth Board. which is the third point down. And you've got Councillor Hughes from West Oxfordshire. Actually, Giles Hughes is the chief executive, not the leader of West Oxfordshire. So you might just want to make that amendment, very small amendment in the paper. But the only other thing I was going to ask was, looking at the list at the end of the projects that you want to take forward, I'm assuming they're in no particular order, but I do think that which is engaging across the electricity distribution network, is absolutely fundamental. We have a really big project across the region when it comes to the network. We've had conversations with the DNOs at our end of the pan-regional partnership. I think that's something we really need to focus on, because that's going to make a big difference to what we can deliver in terms of clean transport in the future, speaking with my EEH hat on. So I'd like to bring that up the agenda as something that we really need to focus on.
Thank you very much. If I can just come in on that. Yes, thank you for pointing that out. It's been mentioned to me a number of times, particularly when I spoke to the councillor earlier this week. The projects are in no particular order, and yes, I was on a call with National Grid earlier this week to see how we can involve them on bringing them forward to raise some of these issues. Obviously, from my engagement, a lot of partners are concerned about kind of energy supply across the region. So I'm engaging with government and other bodies at national level to try to see how we can kind of start to bring people around the table to create that dialogue and to bring some focus for the region. So yes, we'll be moving that one forward as a priority as well.
Thank you. And could I just come in, please, Chair, and just say, so I think that's a very good example of why it's absolutely imperative that we put a lot of effort at this stage into getting the buy-in of all the local authorities within our region. So, you know, obviously there's that gathering intelligence and making sure we're aware of, you know, specific issues and problems. So I think the electricity one actually probably covers all of us. But you know what, I think we need to make sure that we're doing a big bit of work at the beginning to get the same level of engagement for all the councils, because it is a bit checkerbook, you know, it's not consistent at the moment. But you know, we need local authorities to be demonstrating their engagement by being active participants in what we're doing. So I think we need to put some thought into how we're going to do that. And if it means, you know, any of us visiting other councils, I mean, I know Dipesh has been on a great big road tour, but if there's anything any of the rest of us can do to try and secure that level of engagement and commitment from authorities who, you know, might be rather more disengaged at this stage than we would wish, then I think probably most of us are very happy to do that. Well, I certainly am.
Yeah, no, look, I think, Bridget, it's important. It's a very important item, this, so thank you for raising it, even for things like electric charging and decarbonising transport. So, and the need is not just pan-regional, because it is very clearly there, but it's pan-national as well, with the need for something like 100 billion of investment to go into the electricity distribution, production, so on and so forth. So it's a massive need. Thank you for that. Lynette?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I wanted to say, Bridget, thank you so much for such an inspiring introduction and for the energy and drive that you've brought to this. It's absolutely brilliant. I did have a couple of questions. One was actually, in your introduction, you were talking about decarbonising transport, but it didn't feel as though that had made it onto the final list, unless I'm missing that somewhere. So that was a kind of question about if that's in another list somewhere, the sort of second list that Nathan referred to. And the second question is, when you're talking in the final point there, Nathan, about making investment decisions, could you just say a word about how those might be decided and prioritised? Because obviously there are, as we've heard, there are so many brilliant ideas. How are those going to be selected?
Shall I come in first of all, Chair? So you know, the decarbonising transport is obviously very much kind of cross work stream piece of work, obviously very much linked in with East West Rail, because that's all about getting people off off the roads and out of their cars. I think the work on the, as Liz has just said, on the energy supply to make sure that we have a proper EV charging network throughout the area, which is, really very, very poor. And I keep finding myself, driving miles in the wrong direction to go and charge up. So I think, it's part of the bigger picture. But I think it's very important to, from my point of view, that is seen as an environmental priority to us, as well as an economic priority. So I think that's one example of a bigger project which we will be working on in partnership as we move forward. Nathan, have I got it right on that?
You have, yes. And just to build on some of those points you raised, Lynette. So EH are engaged, and I've been speaking with them on the transport issue, and we're continuing to have a dialogue about the environment and regional transport planning. So that's not on the long list yet, because it's not something that we'd even know what that looks like at the minute. But suffice to say, both ourselves and EH are, I suppose, aware of the opportunities to join up and do some good work going forward in terms of the environmental gain and benefits from the transportation agenda. In terms of your other point around, I suppose, investment, they're largely going to be kind of dictated by opportunity, but also about opportunities to do something new or look at some of the challenges that a lot of partners have, particularly local authorities, on being able to deliver both national strategy on environment and sustainability, but also local planning. And I'm thinking about kind of like net gain, land banking, and a lot of these kind of new approaches that local authorities are still trying to work out, and there isn't a consensus on how to go about kind of meeting that in the best, most effective and efficient way possible. So in terms of looking at those opportunities, we're really looking at kind of where we're able to fulfill a mandate of doing something new, where we can get some additional kind of like benefits from that in terms of taking the conversation forward, I suppose. But we'll continue to look out for all of those opportunities. I know also there's some great work that's happening, particularly in Cambridgeshire. I was at the Cambridgeshire, the Natural Cambridgeshire board meeting yesterday, and Dr. Nick was talking about some of the work that they're doing on that side as well. So certainly then being able to amplify some of the best practice and spread that across the region is something that we're looking to take forward.
Thank you, Nathan. Richard.
I just wanted to build very briefly on Bridget's earlier point around partnership working. 100 partners involved in this work. We've brought forward 10 projects. Only 4 of those need to be funded through the partnerships budget.
Yeah.
So there is a real collective here of people putting in their own resources, their own expertise. There's a limit to what the partnership itself can fund, but actually we've got 10 projects, only 4 of which require partnership funding. So it's highly commendable that Bridget and Liz and Nathan have got this huge team of people working collectively under the auspices of the Pan-Regional Partnership.
Thank you, Richard. An important point. Thank you for the drive and the focus and prioritizations that's coming through here. Very important that we keep moving this forward at pace. Are there any other questions? If not, can I ask for the board's approval of both the organizational structure that Bridget identified, and it's contained in the paper, and the work stream itself and the projects? Yep, all supported? Thank you. Duly approved. We now turn to agenda items 7, 8, and 9, which are all items for noting. The first is the work program update. We've talked a little bit about the environment and some of the economy work earlier, but Peter, can I just ask you to say a few words on where we're at on the innovation and economy and the Atlas?
Yes, thanks, Dipesh. I'll keep it brief. In simple terms, the work of the Economy and Environment Group is on course. The key thing I think for board members to be aware of is the Atlas and Prospectus. There was an update for that which was published, and there was a link to that in the partnership bulletin which Karen Clark sent round on the 6th of September. That was the inception report from the consultants who are doing the work. The key thing is that the next stage is where we start pulling together all of the projects and proposals that will eventually form part of the Atlas and Prospectus. And there's a process of an expressions of interest of investment projects with a target threshold of £50 million, so quite ambitious to kind of get scale, and we're looking for things which will have kind of real international cut through. And obviously we're working closely with all of the partners, particularly the local authorities, but obviously all of the business organisations which we're associated with, working of course with the supercluster. And this afternoon there's a session between the consultants and Alistair's universities group to ensure that the universities are bought into it. I think as well as just asking for expressions, I think there's an opportunity to shape and to link people together. So for instance, if we had two proposals that didn't quite meet the threshold, but could be brought together. So there's a really kind of proactive role that the partnership can start to play in making sure that we've got ambitious proposals that obviously fit with the themes of economy and environment that we've been talking about. So this isn't something that will directly involve board members, but your officers, your colleagues will be being closely consulted. An important thing for people to be aware of is that although, as colleagues will know, Buckinghamshire Council is not represented in this partnership, sites from Buckinghamshire, projects from Buckinghamshire will. So we're working slightly under the wire, as it were, with colleagues in Bucks Business First and Bucks LEP. And I think that's really important because obviously the government and ourselves see the geography as a whole, even though for local reasons Buckinghamshire isn't specifically represented. And the last thing to mention is that one of the things that we'll look at in the final stage of the project is how should inward investment activity be coordinated and prioritized on an ongoing basis. And naturally, one of the concerns is, as you do things at a greater scale, is that the specificity of local projects might get sort of deprioritized. Is it going to be done fairly? So one of the things that the economy subgroup, but also this board, I hope will be looking to is how impartially and for the benefit of the whole of the geography is this work being done. And we'll be looking, I think, to develop proposals for how we can do this on an ongoing basis in the same way as we want to with the data observatory. So your scrutiny of how well is it being done and how fairly and appropriately with clear criteria is going to be important. And then the second at this stage, less significant but nevertheless worth noting piece of work is around the so-called network of networks. I talked earlier about linkages across Oxford, Cambridge. In relation to data, not everyone finds data linkages exciting, but bring people together to talk about opportunities across Oxford, Cambridge. So we think that with a small amount of money from the partnership, that we can create some of those linkages. There are great network organisations that are Oxford-based or Cambridge-based or based in the centre. How can they be linked together? So we'll be seeking approval at a subsequent board for a small amount of funding for a consultancy organisation to set up 4 annual events, probably based around sectors and themes that build those networks, not just economy but environment as well. And then using the people who come together to create kind of proto networks, new groups of people who will work at Oxford, Cambridge scale. So that's just one to note for the future. Those are the key things that economy and environment is up to. Thanks, Dipesh.
Thank you very much for that update. Bridget, I think we've just covered your section in the earlier ones. I won't ask you to repeat.
I think we have, yes. I don't want to repeat myself.
No, it's perfect. Thank you. Richard, can you talk a little bit more on the communications piece, please?
Yes, and I think I've largely covered this as well, Dipesh, in answer to one of the earlier questions from Bridget, but the branding and identity work stream has kicked off. The group met and had an excellent discussion on the 7th of September we have contracted Thinking Place, who I know many of you know, to support this work. They will be interviewing board members. In fact, they've already started interviewing board members about this piece of work. It's a scoping study. It will come back to this board in November. And then the only other thing to update on is, and it's in paper 9, if you want to get into any detail, is the partnership conference on the 24th of November. But I'll pause there.
Thank you very much. Questions? Nick.
Yeah, thank you, Dipesh. Well, first of all, with regard to Richard, I think it's probably more to do with the comms side of things, and acknowledging I wasn't able to be at the last week's meeting, branding, and I'm expecting to speak. I guess it's one question I have, and if you use the analysis of somebody who was always a diplomat, Kissinger, when he was looking to who did he speak to when he wanted to kind of speak to Europe, you know, that. So I'm just trying to clarify, as we're going forward, are we trying to answer that question? Because if a big business, or if another part of the country, or if indeed central government wants to get hold of the Oxfam partnership, in terms of our comms strategy, have we got one person to go to? And I know that's going to be difficult, because if it's more of an environment question, my first thought would be, well, just pass it on to Bridget. Likewise, you know, you could say, well, it's Oxfam, it's Dipesh's role. But I'm just trying to understand how that's been rolled out as we are moving forward, and not to, how can I say it, make mistakes that we did in the past.
Nick, I think I'll ask Richard to answer that first, and if I need to chip in, I will. Richard, thank you.
Well, I think thank you. It's such an important question. Who do you phone? And it relates to the point that Peter Horrocks has just made. Really, you know, where do investors, you know, from around the world go? Who do they speak to? Who does government speak to? You know, if it gets inward investment inquiries, for example, in the region. There isn't currently an answer to that question, because the partnership is so small. I mean, it's a micro organisation with a tiny budget. But we do need to get to a point, probably with government, of you know, bringing in the resource so that we can answer that question. And I'll just you know, draw a comparison with my previous work in the West Midlands. It is obvious in the West Midlands who you phone if you have an inward investment inquiry, because they have an inward investment agency with 100 staff and a budget of over £10 million. You know, it's obvious who you call. We know we are at an embryonic stage in being able to put those kind of structures in place for inward investment, but it is a live discussion with Department for Business and Trade. And of course, that will relate to other areas of our work on environment. And ultimately, if the scope of our work extends beyond into, well, you mentioned health, for example, you know, we need the capacity to be able to answer that question. The first part of the answer is have a recognized name and a recognized brand and a recognized identity. And that's what this scoping work is trying to address.
The other thing I would add, Nick, I agree with what Richard has said, is that it is a theme of some of the discussions that I will be having with senior government officials, because you do want that identity and you do want an obvious port of call, which is really the theme that you're identifying. And to make it very, very clear. So I have a meeting with the Permanent Secretary at Business and Trade coming up, and it's one of the items on the agenda that we'll talk through, and likewise on others. So an important point, and we do need to get to clarity around that. Bridget.
So on that, you know, some years ago, I remember we spent quite a long time talking about, you know, would there be a dedicated minister for you know, the previous iteration of the partnership? And actually, I think we managed to end up with five ministers, because I think lots of ministers were interested in it, and nobody actually wanted to, you know, give it away to anyone else. But you know, it would be interesting. I mean, obviously we've got Mr. Gove very focused on Cambridge and Greater Cambridge. you know, I mean, I seriously hope that he sees the value of this partnership in delivering, you know, whatever his vision is for Greater Cambridge as well. Because, you know, if you bung all your eggs in one basket, then that basket gets a bit hot and overheats actually. But so I mean, I hope he appreciates the opportunities in our region as well. But I'm interested to know, Dipesh, with your expertise, whether you think if there is a single minister, you know, ideally a Secretary of State, who is the go-to person within the government for us, whether that's an advantage to us.
I think we're going to have to work across departments, but I think there is an advantage to having ministerial level engagement. So I think it's something we need to build. Before I move on actually to Pete Marlin, Pete Northover, did you want to add anything to this? Because it's an important question that's being raised.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add, Dipesh, is in terms of policy responsibility for pan-regional partnerships as a whole, the lead minister in DLUC would be Dehenna Davison as the Minister for Levelling Up. Obviously, as you say, you have many other policy interests that stretch all across Whitehall, so you know, we need to look into others in Department of Business and Trade, you know, and DCIT and elsewhere, DEFRA not least, and DFT. But as a pan-regional partnership, it'd be Dehenna Davison.
Yeah, and it's important that we establish our presence, and that will be around getting a few initiatives up and running and getting cracking, because that will attract the attention, Bridget, that you're asking for. Pete Marlin.
Thank you. Is this the point where I can talk about the branding? Is this bit?
It is, but I think maybe what we will do, if I can quickly go through the rest of the updates, and then Pete, can I bring you in very briefly when we get to the work program? And whilst this is the right item, I just want to be sure that we give enough airtime to some of the others, and I'll come back and ask you to pick that up, please, Pete. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Great, fantastic. All right, well, look, can I then just firstly ask the board to note the update on the work program and the various streams? If there are no further questions, can I just quickly ask Richard to pick up on the strategy development? Again, it's a paper for noting.
Hillary's just going to say a few words, Dipesh.
Hillary, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dipesh and Richard. So we've had a really good discussion around the work programme. At the last board meeting, we talked about the mission and this emphasis on linking environment and the economy. And I think we've heard that throughout the meeting today. So what the proposal in this document is to develop a strategy that provides that clear link between the mission, what the partnership is here to do, and then why we're focusing on these particular areas of work, and how we will add value by doing that. So in the document, in the paper that you have in front of you, it just gives a little example of how we would want to link the themes of working together. So collaboration, providing a voice, which we're just sort of talking about at the moment, evidence and analysis, which we talked about in the earlier item around the data observatory, and it's absolutely essential, as we said then, that data is used as a basis for developing our strategy and our plans, and focusing on what it is that we can deliver and how we can add value across the whole area. And then influencing, which again we're just touching on at the moment, influencing government and asking government for what the partnership needs in order to be effective. So if the board agrees, then we're proposing to develop a strategy over the next few months that will bring together everything in one place around the mission, who we are, the evidence, the assets in the area, the challenges, the opportunities, and the proposed interventions. It will talk about an action plan for what we can deliver, measurable outcomes, KPIs. I know that a lot of board members have raised issues in the past. How will we know when we've achieved those outcomes? And then the it will set out the relationship with our partners and stakeholders again, which we've talked about a lot today. So the timescale for doing that would be if the board approves the development of a strategy, then we will immediately start an engagement process with partners and stakeholders. We'll bring back further more detailed proposals to the board meeting in November, and then we aim to have a strategy document and an implementation plan ready in spring 2024 for board approval. Thank you.
Very, very succinct, and thank you. Is the board content that the work should proceed with further update in November? Yep. If there are no objections, Hilary, you have the board's blessing.
Thank you, everyone.
Could I then briefly pick up agenda item 9, which is on the All Partner Conference? Karen, will you say a few words to this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Board members should have received a save the date notification a couple of weeks ago from me. We have our first All Partner Annual Conference taking place on Friday, the 24th of November, and we have booked the Ridgeway Centre in Milton Keynes to host that. This is a really important milestone for us. It will be the first time that we bring all of our partners together, obviously beyond the board. And what this All Partner Conference is really seeking to do is three things in terms of our role. So it's around accountability and engagement among the different partners with our board members and with the team, so people can understand and talk and discuss the work programme and what the partnership is all about and what it's seeking to achieve. The second area is around our role in championing the region and celebrating some of the successes around the collaboration and the activities that we can help support through that collaboration and through partnership working. And the third area is around demonstrating delivery. And that's come up already a few times in this board discussion. And what we have done is built a programme alongside and with our strategic partners to actively engage our wider partnership in some of these programme areas that we have discussed. So, for example, we've got the ARC Universities Group that will be leading on a workshop session around the green economy. We have England's Economic Heartland that is going to be leading a session around innovation in local systems, local transport systems, and connected to the regional structures. We have the Environment Agency, who's going to be hosting a workshop around the integrated water management framework activity that they're doing. We have Natural England, who's going to be hosting a workshop around local nature strategies and how we can share best practice around those. And directly in relation to our work programme, we have the agency supporting us with our investment atlas, who will start to build out some of the storyboarding activities as part of that investment atlas and prospectus work. And also, now that we have board approval to progress to the Observatory, Arthur Leggett and another organisation that we've got supporting us with business case planning, Better Futures, is going to be hosting a workshop session around deep diving into the data and analysis needs. So I hope that demonstrates that it's a real true all partner involvement in conference planning. And as I say, it's three things. It's around the accountability of the partnership and engagement with all partners. It's around showcasing, and it's around demonstrating activity and involvement in our programmes. So it's not just a thing happening over here. Actually, it's an all partner effort to get these things done. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions of Karen? Yeah, Alistair.
Yeah, Karen, Alistair Lomax and I have been talking about this, and I think this would be a great event. I think it would be a really inspirational event. Just the one question I had, not for answering now, but just to think about, is who is coming to this and who might we want not to come if they decide to come? Now, as far as I'm concerned, I don't care who comes. And Alistair and I have had more contact with Charles Pither and Stop the Ark, and it's all wonderful, and I don't mind at all. And you know, if they come along and harangue us, is that fine? It's fine by me. I don't mind answering them. But who else might come along? So, for instance, if somebody from a big pharma company said, "I'd like to come along to that, see what you're doing," would we say, "Fine, come along"? So how will that all work? And as I say, we might not have an answer to this now.
Karen?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll take the board's steer on this for certain, but I think we wouldn't want to be exclusive in our approach to a partnership like this, would be what I would assume would be the response for this. We will, I mean, I am about to go live with a registration. Obviously, we can't have everybody involved. But we do have our members, our partnership outlined in our constitution for a certain, but also we have several organisations and others involved in our subgroups, our steering groups. So this is really about cohesion and explaining, providing clarity around what this partnership is about. So I wouldn't recommend. You know, I would assume an inclusive approach to this, but obviously we'll be steered by the numbers and the practicalities around, you know, actually how do we deliver workshops that create meaningful outcomes and outputs as a result. So more to do on that one. But you know, certainly in terms of inviting portfolio holders across local authorities, for example, and people who are actively engaged and want to be engaged in the partnerships programme of activity and work streams, I think is really where the target.
Deepesh, I'm mindful of time. We've got 5 minutes left.
And we've got two very important items that we must come to, including Pete Marlin's earlier question. Karen, can you take that question away and give some further thought to it, please?
I will do.
Bridget, anything?
Yeah, I just want to say I completely support what Karen is saying. You know, the OCP will affect, you know, everybody, and I think, you know, we've got to be completely and utterly inclusive. You know, we can't assume that everybody likes it, and we've got to allow ourselves to hear the voices of those people who don't like it, and you know, will only benefit from hearing the good stuff that we're saying. But you know, we need to hear what's being said by people who don't like it, so that we can address their concerns, and you know, they can influence our planning. So I, you know, strongly advise that we are not selective, please.
What I'm going to ask the team to do is just think through the various questions that Alistair was raising and Bridget's point, and just work through in terms of exactly how we're structuring this conference, who we're expecting to attend, and etc. Okay, so can we give just some further thought to it, please, Karen? All right, can I, so thank you. This item was purely for noting. The next item, which is actually around the work program, is for approval. So it's important that we do that. It ties in also with the round of funding that Pete was raising in his agenda item. So Richard, if you could do a very brief introduction, but then I do want to pick up Pete Marlin's question and allow him to say what it is. Okay.
Certainly, yeah. We need to, as a board, need to seek your approval of the work programme to formally submit that to government to DLUC by the end of September. The work programme and the milestones form the basis of the mid-year review, which Chris referred to. That will take place in November, and assuming everything's okay with that mid-year review, that will unlock the second £500,000 of funding for this year. So it is a formal process that we're going through to seek your approval today.
Pete, in what you wanted to raise, can we approve the revised budget, or is it germane to approving the revised budget? Because I do want to include your question in this section. Can we first approve the budget and then raise your point, Peter?
Yeah, my point isn't about budget.
Sorry,
this is just
approve the work program. Sorry, approve the work program. Can we approve the work program? Good. Thank you very much. Peter, can we come back to you, please? I'm sorry I held your question till later. I just wanted to be sure that we approve this work program before we lose time, before we run out of time. But Peter, please, you were talking about branding.
Yeah, it's not a question, it's more of a statement really to be made on not just behalf of Milton Keynes, but I know that Jonathan is on the call as well, and we've been talking and he agrees with me. Just to point out why we would like to take this forward is that, and it's happened in the meeting today, I will reiterate the point and I will keep reiterating the point. In the Oxford to Cambridge corridor, half of the population and the 4 biggest cities and towns are reduced to the word to. In this meeting, 3 people that have spoken on substantive anthems haven't just referred to it as the Oxford to Cambridge corridor, they've dropped the 2 and actually reduced it to the Oxcam corridor. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable that when we talk about inclusivity, half your board, half the area that is represented by this board does not feel included in this agenda. And that needs to change. All our towns in the central area recognise the power of Oxford and Cambridge internationally, but it cannot continue that the biggest area, the 4 biggest cities and towns, continue to be reduced to effectively bit part players. It cannot continue. It will not continue. And it's frankly insulting when we are reduced not just to a 2, but reduced out of the picture completely. And that's why I think we need to have a think, because the Liverpool to Newcastle corridor is not called the Newcastle to Liverpool corridor. It's called the Northern Powerhouse. The Birmingham City region is not called the Birmingham City region. And so it is just being very clear that it can't continue, and that I get it, but I think the board needs to be very clear about the very high levels of discontent within the central area about how we've got to where we are. There is hopefully a positive intent going forward, but I think the board really needs to be very clear about our deep upset about where we are at the moment.
So Pete, I think firstly, can I just say on behalf of the board, really apologies if it came across in that way at all. Secondly, entirely supportive of the point that you make, that we are talking about this across the region, and there's an awful lot of important activity out with just Oxford and Cambridge, the whole of the Central Belt area. And absolutely right. I think the branding work is important, it's urgent, partly for the reasons that you've identified. So if you're feeling that the tone is continuing with whatever the tone was before, rest assured we are determined to actually make this come across and be seen to be totally inclusive right the way across the region. So thank you for your point. Well made. Can I move on then, please, to the revised 23-24 budget? I think the paperwork is very clear. Are there any questions from the board? No. Can I then please request that we approve the revised budget for the current year and the proposed budget for next year? If there are no objections, duly approved. Thank you very much. Governance and assurance framework, which is the last of the agenda items. Just ask Alison to provide a very brief summary, but frankly, I think this has been through the previous incarnation in the shadow board. It's really a question of approving the Constitution and providing some delegated authority to me and Richard to make any further minor changes to the Constitution, noting that the Constitution will be brought back to the board annually. Also, to note that the related documents on governance which are being pulled together will be brought to the board in due course. Are there any questions on the governance documentation or any particular issues which are outstanding? Lynette.
Yeah, thank you for this. Just a couple of comments on section 17 in relation to the chairing. The first is that clause 17 refers to voting board members. Those are not actually defined, and it's not clear whether that's the same as core members who are referred to earlier. So that's just a sort of, that's probably just a being consistent on terminology point. The second is that again, the section on the chair is not explicit as to what happens if the chair is unavailable for a meeting. So I mean, there's normally a clause that simply says somebody else, the board agrees somebody else to chair, and it may be that just needs slotting in as well. But those are a couple of very, very minor points. I have no substantive.
Thank you for those. We'll pick those up and possibly table a slightly revised constitution at the next meeting, just on those two items. Is there anything else? Okay, well, I think we can take that as approval of the draft constitution subject to those two items. Delegated authority of which we need to make minor modifications, recognize and come back. And then finally, noting that related documents will be coming up to a future board meeting. Thank you very much. I'm into any other business. And I think one of the, well, there's only one item on my part, but can I just ask if others have any other business to raise? If not, the only item on my part is I've been giving some thought to, do we need to engage more explicitly and more programmatically with businesses? And I'd welcome your thoughts between now and the next board meeting on how best we might do this. There's already quite a bit of relationship with the cluster super board, etc., and with individual businesses. But how do we actually bring this to a slightly greater degree of formality? Could we just have a conversation, not for today, because it's an item in itself, but between now and then, give some thought to it. I'll be reaching out to each of you, please, for your reflections on should we, how do we best do it? What are the structures that we should employ? That apart, if we could just close the recording for a moment, I have just one